Imagine living in a world where speaking your mind as a woman could literally get you locked into a cage of iron and steel. Where a simple argument with your husband or a complaint about unfair treatment could result in a punishment so humiliating, so dehumanizing, that entire communities would gather to watch your suffering as entertainment. Today, we're diving into one of history's most disturbing examples of systematic oppression, the scold's bridle, also known as the branks. This medieval torture device wasn't just about punishment. It was about control, silencing, and sending a chilling message to all women about their place in society. Historical context: to understand the true horror of the scold's bridle, we need to step back into medieval Europe, particularly England and Scotland during the 16th and 17th centuries. This was a time when women had virtually no legal rights. They couldn't own property, couldn't vote, and were considered the property of their fathers, and then their husbands. The concept of a scold in medieval law was a woman who was considered quarrelsome, gossipy, or simply too outspoken. But here's the terrifying reality: almost any behavior could label a woman as a scold. Arguing with your husband about household matters, complaining about working conditions, defending yourself against false accusations, or even expressing religious opinions that differed from the norm could all result in this horrific punishment. The legal system of the time viewed women's voices as inherently disruptive to social order. The very act of a woman speaking assertively was seen as a threat to the patriarchal structure that kept medieval society functioning according to male authorities. The device itself, the scold's bridle, was a cage-like contraption made of iron bands that fit over a woman's head like a helmet. But this wasn't just a simple muzzle. It was designed to cause maximum humiliation and physical discomfort. The device consisted of several key components that made it particularly cruel. The framework. Iron bands formed a cage around the head, with a hinged front section that could be opened to place the device on the victim, and then locked shut. Some versions had decorative elements like horns or animal ears to further humiliate the wearer. The tongue depressor. The most sinister element was a flat piece of metal, sometimes spiked, that was inserted into the mouth and pressed down on the tongue. This made speaking impossible and caused intense discomfort. Some versions had spikes that would cut the tongue if the woman attempted to move it. The locking mechanism. A padlock at the back ensured the victim couldn't remove the device herself. Only the person who ordered the punishment, usually a husband, father, or town official, held the key. The chin support. A metal piece supported the lower jaw, ensuring the mouth remained closed around the tongue depressor, making the entire contraption even more restrictive. The psychological impact was perhaps even more devastating than the physical pain. The device completely stripped away a woman's ability to communicate, reducing her to a silent object of public ridicule. How it was used. The application of the scold's bridle followed a disturbing ritual that was designed to maximize shame and social control. The accusation. Any man could accuse a woman of being a scold. This could be her husband, father, neighbor, or even a stranger. The accusations were often vague: disturbing the peace, gossiping, or being disagreeable. The sentence. Local magistrates, who were always men, would decide on the punishment. There was rarely a fair trial or opportunity for the accused to defend herself. The woman's voice, the very thing being punished, was considered unreliable testimony. The public spectacle. The woman would be fitted with the bridle in full view of the community. This wasn't done privately. It was a public event designed to humiliate not just the victim, but to send a message to all women watching. The duration. Punishments could last anywhere from a few hours to several days. During this time, the woman might be paraded through town, chained to a post in the market square, or forced to sit outside her own home as neighbors jeered and children threw stones. The community's role, perhaps most chilling, was how the entire community participated. Rather than showing compassion, townspeople would often gather to mock and ridicule the victim. This created a culture where women policed each other's behavior out of fear of facing the same fate. The device was particularly popular during witch trial periods, when any woman showing independence or unusual knowledge could be labeled dangerous. Midwives, herbalists, and women who could read were often targets. Psychological and social impact. The scold's bridle did far more damage than just physical pain. It was a weapon of psychological warfare against women's autonomy. Learned helplessness. Women lived in constant fear of speaking out about anything, even legitimate grievances. This created a generation of women who learned to suppress their thoughts, opinions, and even their basic needs to avoid punishment. Social isolation. The threat of the bridle meant that women couldn't form supportive communities or discuss their shared experiences of oppression. Speaking to other women about their problems could be interpreted as gossip and led to punishment. Economic control. By silencing women who might complain about working conditions or unfair treatment, the device served economic interests. Women couldn't organize for better conditions or fair wages if they couldn't speak about their experiences. Religious suppression. Many women punished with the bridle were those who questioned religious authority or expressed spiritual ideas that differed from established doctrine. This effectively silenced female voices in spiritual and intellectual discourse. Intergenerational trauma. Mothers couldn't pass down wisdom, stories, or cultural knowledge to their daughters without risking punishment. This systematically erased women's contributions to oral history and cultural preservation. The most insidious aspect was how the device made women complicit in their own oppression. Knowing that any woman could report another for scolding, women learned to monitor and control each other's behavior. Broader context of medieval women's oppression. The scold's bridle wasn't an isolated phenomenon. It was part of a comprehensive system designed to control women's bodies, minds, and voices. Other contemporary punishments included ducking stools for scolds and suspected witches, public whippings for adultery, and confinement in scolds' cages suspended over rivers. These punishments shared common themes: public humiliation, physical discomfort, and the message that women's bodies and voices belonged to male authorities. Legal systems of the time explicitly codified women's inferiority. Under coverture laws, married women had no legal identity separate from their husbands. The concept of domestic violence didn't exist. A man had the legal right to discipline his wife as he saw fit. Education was largely denied to women, ensuring they couldn't access legal knowledge to defend themselves or economic opportunities to gain independence. The few women who did become literate often faced suspicion and accusations of witchcraft. Medical knowledge was used to justify oppression, with physicians claiming that women's wandering wombs made them inherently unstable and in need of male control. Speaking out was literally pathologized as a symptom of female hysteria. The slow decline in legal changes. The use of scold's bridles began declining in the 18th century, but not due to sudden enlightenment about women's rights. Several factors contributed to their gradual disappearance. Economic changes. As economies became more complex and required women's labor in new ways, completely silencing half the population became impractical. Religious shifts. Some Protestant movements emphasized individual relationships with God, making it harder to justify completely silencing women's spiritual voices. Legal evolution. Slowly, very slowly, legal systems began recognizing some limited rights for women, though full equality remained centuries away. Social resistance. Despite the risks, some women and progressive men began speaking out against the most extreme forms of oppression. However, it's crucial to understand that the disappearance of the physical device didn't mean the end of systematic silencing of women. The method simply evolved and became more subtle. Legacy and modern parallels. While we might feel comfortable dismissing the scold's bridle as a relic of backward medieval times, its legacy persists in ways that should make us deeply uncomfortable. Workplace silencing. Women who speak assertively in professional settings are still labeled as bossy, aggressive, or difficult, modern versions of being called a scold. Online harassment. Digital platforms have created new ways to silence women's voices through coordinated harassment campaigns, doxing, and threats of violence. Legal limitations. In many parts of the world, women still face legal restrictions on their right to speak, assemble, or express opinions in public. Cultural conditioning. The centuries of conditioning that taught women to make themselves smaller, quieter, and less challenging didn't disappear overnight. Victim blaming. When women speak out about abuse or discrimination, they often face the same accusations medieval women did of being called liars, troublemakers, or attention seekers. The psychological mechanisms that made the scold's bridle effective, the social shame, community rejection, and fear of punishment, are still used to control women's voices today. The scold's bridle represents one of history's most literal examples of silencing women's voices, but its true horror lies not just in the physical device itself, but in the entire social system it represented and reinforced. This wasn't just about individual cruel men punishing individual women. It was a systematic tool of oppression that served to maintain power structures that benefited from women's silence. It taught entire generations of women that their thoughts, experiences, and voices were not just unwelcome, but dangerous. Understanding this history isn't about dwelling in the past. It's about recognizing how the impulse to silence women's voices has adapted and evolved throughout history. Every time we see a woman dismissed as too emotional, when she's actually expressing legitimate anger, every time we see a woman's expertise questioned in ways a man's wouldn't be, every time we see a woman face punishment for speaking truth to power, we're seeing echoes of the same system that created the scold's bridle. The women who endured this torture were not passive victims. They were human beings with thoughts, dreams, fears, and wisdom that the world desperately needed to hear. Their enforced silence represents an incalculable loss of human knowledge, creativity, and progress. Today, as we continue fighting for equality and justice, we honor those silenced women by refusing to be silenced ourselves. We speak not just for ourselves, but for all the voices throughout history that were locked away behind bars of iron and steel. The scold's bridle may be gathering dust in museums now, but our vigilance against all forms of silencing must continue. Because the moment we forget how easily voices can be stolen, we risk losing them again. Remember their silence. Honor it by never accepting your own.